GPT-5 Pro is the most powerful large language model available, and you're not using it nearly enough. If you get a ChatGPT Pro subscription, OpenAI's highest tier, you get access to Pro thinking. In OpenAI's own words, GPT Pro uses more compute to think harder and provide consistently better answers. Well, how good are these answers? A 23-year-old with no formal advanced mathematics training has been solving decades-old open mathematics problems often just with a single-shot prompt. Ethan Malik, an economics professor at Wharton studying AI, said, GPT 5.4 Pro continues to be the only model of its class. For anything really hard and complex, I throw it into the maw with every bit of context I can think of. More often than not, something very useful comes out. I can't get the same results from Codex or Claude Code or anything else. If you're doing complicated academic work, there just isn't anything else that is a substitute right now. Now, besides academic work, I personally use Pro all the time for mobile and web app development and also back-end infrastructure engineering, and it helps me get much better results. Now, it seems like you'd always want better results, right? So why would you ever not use GPT Pro? GPT Pro gives you much better answers, but it comes at the cost of taking a ton of time to give you those answers. Additionally, if you're working in Codex and look through your model picker, you're not going to see GPT Pro available. That's a big problem because then it becomes very difficult to provide all the context of your business, your research, and your code to this very powerful GPT Pro model. So how can you most effectively use GPT Pro from Codex? Are you limited to just copy and pasting inefficiently between the web UI and Codex? In this video, I'm going to explain to you how to insert GPT Pro into your knowledge work, whether that's academic work, business, or consulting, and how to do it in a way that eliminates the friction between GPT Pro and Codex so that you're not doing any manual copy and pasting while still providing complete context about your code base and your problem to GPT Pro. The way in which I insert Pro into my work is to have it review my plans for my hardest problems after first having taken a pass at planning and thinking through those problems with some combination of Codex and Claude Code. Now, why is that? For many types of software and research, Codex and Claude Code alone are sufficient to produce good or excellent results. If you don't need the more powerful Pro thinking model, then there's no need to include it in your process. My usual process towards creating anything significant, whether that be software or some research project, is to first iterate on a plan in various cycles using some skills I've created and some skills I've borrowed from others, using both Codex and Claude Code until I feel content with whatever plan I have that I've produced. And then I typically pass the plan to Codex to implement because I find Codex much better at implementing and doing work than is Claude Code. However, there are two conditions under which my next step won't be to implement, but rather to have that plan get reviewed by GPT Pro. First, if I have significant doubts on some aspect of the plan, either from a technical perspective, an architectural perspective, or a product perspective, I'll pass the plan along with my contextual questions that I want answered to GPT Pro to get it reviewed. Second, even if I don't have doubts, but I think the plan is on some topic of significant architectural, technical, or scientific complexity. This includes for some research or writing project where I'm making some difficult, nuanced argument. I'll pass the plan or the piece of writing to GPT Pro for review. The exact threshold of determining sufficiently architecturally, technically, scientifically complex is going to have a lot of variation across fields, across projects within fields, and across people for a given project. So if you're working, for example, in number theory, the field of mathematics, on the class of those problems that are starting to get solved by others with ChatGPT Pro, it's likely that regardless of who you are for any problem that you're working on in this space that you're going to want to think about how to best structure it to be attacked by the GPT Pro model. Let's consider, however, the nuances with two fields, which will apply to a lot of you who are watching this, and for which the use of Pro is a lot more ambiguous. So these are 1, economics research, and 2, doing consulting work, whether as an AI consultant or any other kind of consulting. Economics research can vary in complexity, both across and within fields in economics. And in a particular project, there can be more or less complex tasks. So, for example, I noticed when working with a renowned economist in the field of industrial organization, which within applied macroeconomics is known to be a very technical field, that by using GPT Pro on a plan before implementing some kind of structural estimation that we were conceiving doing, that GPT's Pro model was able to come up with many nuances and objections, which this professor, who has many publications in the top 5 economics journals, agreed upon reflection that these objections and nuances proposed by GPT Pro were indeed worth addressing in our plan. And so that kind of calibrates you to the level of general intelligence that GPT Pro has, that a top economist in his very technical field is getting valuable advice that he didn't think of on first reflection. Now, among applied microeconomics fields, industrial organization is known to be the most technical. When working with applied microeconomists in labor and political economy, we haven't found much of an advantage to using Pro because the types of empirical methods typically used in those fields are, for coding agents now, pretty simple and rote, and things on which these agents are already trained to be very good at. Additionally, across all these fields, Pro is not helpful for tasks involved in actually implementing the model or for anything which requires interactive data analysis, because Pro has no ability to write code, query a dataset, and then update based on what it finds. Finally, even when applying GPT Pro to more complex theoretical fields like microeconomic and econometric theory, there is skill and thought which needs to be put into thinking about how to package a given prompt for GPT Pro. Often simply dumping a set of PDFs and asking a question to GPT Pro is not going to get you good answers. Instead, what's better is to have pre-processed any input PDFs that you wanted to give as context to GPT Pro and extract from those PDFs just the essential parts that are relevant to whatever problem you're facing. My point in bringing up this example is that your pre-existing agentic coding skill and understanding of context management still matters and could be pivotal for getting good results out of GPT Pro. A second field I have experience in which the decision to use GPT Pro is more ambiguous, is working as a consultant. Now, my own consulting work is either typically some sort of AI implementation or AI education, but the nuances I've experienced with finding the appropriate place to use GPT Pro really apply to any kind of consulting. In my consulting work, I do many tasks at varying levels of complexity. For example, I often have to write proposals. These proposals can sometimes be fairly standardized, but typically have to be individualized for a particular client's needs, whether for something I'm implementing for them or some kind of agentic coding training. So I have a skill which I've made to help me think through and automate this thinking process for the individuation of creating proposals and brainstorming requirements that are very particular to each client. What I'll often do, however, especially for fairly complex proposals, is ask Pro before sending the proposal out to review the proposal and see if it finds any flaws. This often turns out to be quite helpful for finding flaws at a structural level in a proposal, which I may not have thought of, but which are going to be very important for an eventual implementation, and which lesser thinking models usually don't catch. The types of things that Pro often catches, for example, are clarifying questions that I should ask and to which decision makers I should ask them in order to more tightly scope out some deliverable. Often it'll help also find small and sometimes big inconsistencies between what a client has requested, usually based on the parts of the transcript of a call recording I've had with the client and what I'm asking for in the proposal, which, especially when we have many calls to scope something out, there can be little but important details which get lost, and I find Pro often helps me find these little nits in the proposal. In the context of teaching, Pro might give me ideas for how to better structure a curriculum and like the ordering to introduce certain topics given where my audience is likely to be coming into some agentic coding course, or how to think about creating a single course which is able to serve many audiences at varying levels of abilities. Now, Claude Code and Codex can, of course, help you figure these things out too, but I just find that Pro is really good at finding things that neither of them will catch. Besides proposals, the other place where I get a ton of alpha from GPT Pro is on thinking through plans for architecturally complex software. For me and a lot of developers now, the aspect of creating software which takes the most mental energy is planning what it is you're going to build. The actual implementation, conditional on a good plan, is pretty easy. Models like Codex are now very good at long-running tasks and staying reliably on target. Now, if you're making a simple CRUD app, CRUD means create, read, update, delete, then often you can just vibe these things without even making a plan ahead of time. It's going to maybe not match exactly what you had in your head, but if you don't care about it fulfilling some very exact specific requirements, it's a simple app. Maybe you don't even need a plan. However, in my opinion, the ease of making good CRUD applications, even with agentic coding tools, is somewhat overstated. On some level, something like Linear, the project management app, can be reduced to just thinking of it as a CRUD application. You're just creating new issues, then you're updating them, and then when you update them, they move along a Kanban board and then they get deleted. And you might think, this isn't really complex software, I could just make it myself. And then you go out and you try to make this software and you find that there's all sorts of fine edges, lots of incredible UI that Linear has come up with, and lots of little conveniences, little touches that they have put a ton of thought into, and which really serves some useful purpose for project management type needs. But definitely, if I'm making more complex software, I'll take my plan and send it to GPT Pro. So, for example, here's the architecture for PaySlice, a fintech product which I've worked on. PaySlice has 6 services in 3 different environments. There's a handful of external vendors, Plaid for banking, Phoenix for payments, Supabase for auth. There's 2 operational databases, plus a separate analytical warehouse, an orchestration layer with Dagster, a business intelligence app, and an operator tooling lane. And all of this has to stay coherent. A single product change, say adjusting how the app displays pay date readiness, can ripple through 9 of these boxes across all environments. This is exactly the kind of system where I would refuse to implement a plan before first passing it through GPT Pro. The seems a good plan needs to respect are bigger than what I can often reliably hold in my own head, and bigger than what I find Codex or Claude Code will reliably surface on their own. So we've covered 3 pretty diverse use cases: economics research, consulting, and software development. But for you in your own situation, which may include some of these use cases or perhaps others, how do you figure out when it's worth the time, because GPT Pro calls can take quite a while, when is it worth the time to use GPT Pro? My recommendation for figuring out this appropriate complexity threshold is to simply experiment yourself. For different problems on which you're considering receiving Pro's input, give the same prompt to both Pro in one thread and thinking in another thread, and see if there's a difference in the quality of the results you get. So initially, you might want to just send every problem that you would ever think of to both Pro and thinking. And then you'll get a sense over time and intuition for you in the particular domains you work in, which tasks really need to be sent to Pro and which ones you can just push forward on with thinking. Next, let's discuss how to actually use GPT Pro from Codex. As I mentioned, GPT Pro doesn't show up in the Codex model picker. You could connect to it by API using a coding agent like OpenCode, with which you can pay for any model by API, but your bill will get ludicrously expensive fast. So the practical question becomes, how can you get all the relevant context, your plan surrounding a code, any important business or research ideas and documents in front of Pro without manually copy and pasting a dozen files into the ChatGPT web UI? The answer is to split a problem into two. First, you package the context, meaning you have a coding agent assemble a single file as a bundle, taking all the relevant context in your repo and turning it into one file, including your prompt, what you want to ask ChatGPT Pro. Then second, you need to ship this bundle to ChatGPT. So something that could be you, but ideally something automated, actually opens up ChatGPT in the browser window, puts in this bundle you've created, selects the right model, presses enter, and then waits 5, 10, 20, 30 minutes, however long it takes to get the ChatGPT Pro response back. For step one, I use Oracle, a command line interface created by Pete Steinberger, the creator of OpenClaw. Oracle's job is narrow and useful. You give it a prompt and a set of files or globs, and it expands them into one markdown file, respecting git ignore, ignoring folders like node modules, which you wouldn't want to include, and warning you when the package you're creating for Pro is going to blow past Pro's context budget. And then finally, it'll copy it to your clipboard. So here's one command, for example, that you could use to do this. Now, in practice, I don't use Oracle manually in the command line interface. Instead, I've created a skill, which I've made publicly available in my skills repository, which you guys can use too. And I invoke that whenever I want to get ChatGPT Pro's opinion on anything. For step two, taking this package Oracle has made and getting it to the web UI, I use the Codex Chrome plugin. Codex opens ChatGPT in Chrome, pastes in the Oracle bundle, waits for a response, and then brings the response back to Codex. Once the answer comes back to the Codex session, I can review it, argue with it, or pass it forward to implementation. I made a video last week on the Codex Chrome plugin. It's great. I love it, but there are a few things to be aware of. If you're in Europe, the Codex Chrome plugin simply isn't available yet. And sometimes I even find on my computer that Codex is sometimes not able to access the Chrome plugin, even though I have it installed. There are just some little hiccups. And so what I do instead, and what I've enforced in the skill, is that I roll back to computer use, which is available and is a plugin which allows on a Mac Codex to control any application on your computer. The benefit of using the Chrome plugin is that if you use the Chrome plugin and it's working, it'll be able to work with your Chrome session in a background tab without taking over your entire Chrome window. So you can't work simultaneously in Chrome while Codex is doing its thing with Oracle in the ChatGPT window if you're using computer use relative to using the Chrome plugin. And finally, there is a third option, which is that you could use browser use, which is Codex's inbuilt browser inside the Codex application. I use this all the time, especially for debugging web applications, but I find it to be the buggiest of the three. It's the one that works least consistently, and you'll have to authenticate separately in this browser use session in the Codex desktop app, whereas computer use for the Chrome plugin is going to use your already authenticated session in your Chrome browser. So it's a little bit easier to use. Let me now give you a demo of what it looks like to use GPT Pro from within Codex using Oracle. So here I am within Codex, and I've created this obnoxiously detailed plan for some changes that I'm making in a database migration on a project I have called Econ Now. For context, here's the project. It's a database which contains information about economics conferences and economics job market candidates, people searching for jobs on the economics job market. The website and database used to look a little bit different, used to look something like this, and it went kind of viral on Econ Twitter because this problem of needing to find everybody applying for a job in one place is something that's been a problem in the profession for a long time, and this website solved it. However, now I'm thinking about developing it a little bit differently, and instead, the way I'm setting it up is that if you're a verified economist, according to your email showing up on some economics directory of like listing of economics professors or grad students, then you'll be able to connect to and authenticate against this whole thing by MCP. And so you'd just be able to ask questions like which conferences have submission deadlines in the next 90 days and get a reliable answer. And so in this process, I've created like a ginormous plan here. Here's the HTML version I made for it to be easier to read. But then the original version here is this big markdown document. Now, with these giant plans, I'm often, depending on the project, not actually reading them step by step. So this one, for example, is kind of obnoxiously complex, and it would just be a pain in the ass, right, for me to go through this thing piece by piece. And so typically the way in which I'm evaluating the quality of the plan is with its results, making sure that certain tests I would want and certain behavioral things I'd want line up. So to be specific, in this plan, what we're doing right now is creating a denormalization of some canonical tables. So originally, this database was only intended to store job market candidates, but I want to make it more expansive and have it be a directory of the entire economics profession as a whole. And there's also an idea that people can be searching for jobs in many different years. So they may not just be on the job market in 1 year, but also in several years. And so instead of having job market participation tied to a person in that table, we'll probably need to create a separate job market participations table. And now, this is a pretty complex plan, and so before I even implement it, this is the kind of thing that I would want to send through GPT Pro. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to ask, can you use Oracle to get GPT Pro's review of our plan? Don't send the HTML one. It's token inefficient. A package, anything else you think is relevant. And let's see how it works. So one little thing here is that there's been this thing going around on Twitter recently about creating HTML markdown docs instead of just rather markdown documents, because HTML documents are easier for human to read and they can have, different kinds of formatting like this, which is better for human understanding than markdown, which is what these coding agents are typically producing. But HTML is relatively inefficient in terms of token usage. And so you wouldn't want to pass an HTML document to GPT Pro. And so here I'm just specifying that, but mostly it's relying on this Oracle skill I've made, which you can see what it looks like here. Here are like the instructions for how that skill ought to work. While this is going, maybe I'll walk you through what this Oracle skill looks like. So the name is just Oracle. It says use the StyP Oracle CLI to bundle a prompt plus the right files for ChatGPT review, render copy with Oracle, then submit through the user's Chrome session by default when safe. Prefer the Chrome skill. So this is what comes with that Chrome plugin I mentioned. And then if that doesn't work, then prefer computer use. And then if that doesn't work, then use the browser plugin. Use the latest Pro model with extended thinking when available. So then it explains to Codex what Oracle exactly is. Here's kind of like a default workflow for using Oracle. It says pick the minimum files that contain the truth, blah, 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 render and copy. Submit through the browser path ladder. So this is, Chrome plugin first, then computer use, then browser use. Watch for the final answer, extract it, and verify it against local files and tests. So it's got, more detail of this browser submit ladder, some kind of safety pre-flight. So like if it's checking that there's no secrets, credentials, customer data, etc. being sent to ChatGPT Pro. And then it has this golden path, which is like the typical way of doing things. And then also if these 3 automated ways fail, then it says here's a manual paste fallback. Basically what it will do is copy this package that you're sending to Pro to your clipboard. And so you can just open up ChatGPT, paste it, press enter, and then take out the response manually. So it says here, the Oracle bundle is now on the clipboard. I'm connecting to Chrome via the Codex Chrome extension, then I'll open a fresh ChatGPT chat. So let's actually go here and maybe we'll see it start to do something pretty soon. All right, so we see it's open here in this window. It actually opened it up in a different window. I had instantly open here, but we can kind of see what's going on now over here. So it's reached ChatGPT, and then we can see that it's like labeled here as Oracle Plan Review. But I guess pretty soon now it should be pasting in this package. And another thing we can see here is that this like cursor is an indicator that Codex is working in this session. And so it says here, ChatGPT is logged in, and I see a blank composer. I'll set the model/mode if the picker exposes a pro/extended thinking option, and then paste the bundle. One thing I'd mention here is that right now I have the high model selected. I wouldn't recommend that when you're doing something like this. You should just use the low model, like the lowest level of thinking, because it's a pretty simple task to do, right? Like right now I've been waiting a couple of minutes while it's going through this, but actually let me see if I can on the fly change the level of thinking. I'm not sure if I can. It might work, it might not. All right, so it says the ChatGPT page is already in extended pro mode, which is exactly what we want. I'm pasting the Oracle bundle and submitting the fresh chat now. Paste Oracle bundles. If I look back, let's see what's going on here. All right, so this big markdown document got pasted in. It automatically pressed enter. I think we can click on this and view it. All right, not the best formatting, but you can see that it's like this giganto document that's like it's asking to do a deep independent review, not a style pass, key things to pressure test, and all this shit. And then it's just massive, right? Like this is, I don't know, a couple thousand lines at least. So GPT Pro is now starting. We'll probably have to wait 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll get some response back. And Codex here says this is a pro/extended thinking run. So I'm going to let it cook and pull sparingly rather than poking the page too much. So the nice thing about this is that the way we have it all set up, this is happening now, and we can kind of just let it go on in the background. So I'm going to move it back to high so that when it captures these results, it's using a higher level of thinking in order to analyze the results. I'm actually not 100% sure if you're able to change the thinking level on the fly like this. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. Something to experiment with. All right, so it finished, and we see that it took 21 minutes to do this. A lot of this was maybe it being inefficient at figuring out how to paste in to ChatGPT the bundle, but eventually it did it. And then you can see that it was able to sort of autonomously pull that Chrome window without me having to necessarily be there. And finally, it says done, okay? And then it says, okay, this pro review says do not start implementation yet. And then basically it's decided in this pro review, which we can also look at independently, which kinds of things need to be addressed in this plan before we start implementing it, and which sorts of things are already good in the plan. And so here we can see that I actually thought for 8 minutes and 42 seconds. I would not start implementation yet. The plan is much stronger than a first draft, but there are still several contradictions that could cross auth regressions, replay drift, or privacy leakage. Then it has this section where it says the things the plan gets right and should not change. And then it has this concrete edit checklist. And so this one, this P0 here, is finding a contradiction or a problem that would occur if I had multiple years' job market candidates that I was backfilling into this new database and this database migration. And so, in fact, I just have 1 year, and so this may not be relevant. Here's a type of internal contradiction it found in the plan. It says the original requirements say to remove people.email, people.alternate email, blah, 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 field policy roles. The Titan plan correctly says to keep them as routed payload paths. So it's just finding in the context of a very big plan that had been made, some basic internal contradictions that Claude Code, which initially made the first version of the plan, I didn't show you guys that, but what I usually do is have Claude Code make a plan first. I think it's better at that. And then I have Codex review the plan. In that iteration step, it didn't find these internal contradictions. And so GPT Pro, which uses a lot more compute, is able to, in its reasoning, find some of these internal contradictions and so doing, give you a better, more cleaned plan before implementation. That's it for today, guys. I just wanted to give you a taste of what GPT Pro looks like live. What you should definitely do is start integrating this into your own workflows. I'm going to have this Oracle skill linked in the description below so that you're going to be able to use this just off the shelf yourself without really needing to do any thinking. Just make sure you've got that Chrome plugin and computer use installed in Codex. Additionally, if you're the part of my audience that are economists, I've made a new website called AIEconomist.io. Here, if you want individual coaching with me, you can book appointments right there. And I've been doing a lot of group workshops on Claude Code and Codex, specifically for economists. And so on my training site here, you're going to see a description of what they entail and some of the experience other people who have benefited from my materials have to say about working with me. And so if you're interested in that, you can just click this button to book a consultation. It'll get you to my booking link. And if you're interested in just working with me more generally, you should definitely check out the AI MBA, which is my school server with over 1,800 people trying to get to the cutting edge of agentic coding. And if you want to jump on more regular group calls with accountability on whatever it is your goals are in this agentic coding space, you can join in here in the AI MBA Pro, where I'll help debug your particular issues that you're having with agentic coding, whatever those may be. So until next time, guys, peace.